Hey everyone, what is happening? All right, so we looked at the male reproduction and we are now looking at female reproduction. This is going to be new stuff for us, everyone. And I know that we're all in isolation right now and doing our best to stay busy, and we want to have this learning opportunity. So I feel this is really, really important, and a lot of people don't know this stuff. But I think this is really, really good just to know in general. So we're going to look at the internal structures and functions of the female reproductive system. All right. So the first thing we're going to start with is just the anatomy. So we're going to fill in, and everyone got this sheet before the break. And if you didn't, that's okay. You can just follow along. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start over here with the ovaries. And we have another one right here as well. And so females, for the most part, all have two ovaries. And then the ovaries from there, we've got these finger-like projections, and these are called fimbriae. And then we move up to the fallopian tubes. Now, at the top of the uterus, which we will look at in a second, we've got the fundus. And that leads us into our uterus, which is the main thing, the main structure right there. And what we have is we have the endometrium and we have the myometrium. The endometrium is the part, and we're going to look at this a little bit more. This is the part that the egg, the fertilized egg, will implant into, and this is where the placenta will grow. This will give all the nutrients to the developing embryo. Next, we just have the myometrium. Myo, remember, it means muscle. So this is the part that will contract during birth as well as during the menstrual cycle. And from there, we move down into the cervix. And then we have the cervical canal. And that leads us into the vagina and then the vaginal opening. So just like we covered the male reproduction structures, these are all the female reproductive structures as well. So now we're going to go on to the functions. And for ovaries, this is the site of egg development. Now, remember, if you just look up over here, the ovaries are held onto the outside of the uterus by the ovarian ligaments. Next, we have fimbriae, and I mentioned this. These are feather-like projections that move in a wave-like motion, and these direct the released eggs into the fallopian tube. So when a woman ovulates, the egg is released from the ovaries, and the fimbriae pulls it in. You can imagine you've got your fingers in front of you, and you're waving it in. All right. So it leads the egg to the fallopian tubes, and this is also called the oviduct. And if a person has two ovaries, they're going to have two fallopian tubes, and inside the fallopian tubes there are cilia, and these sweep the egg down towards the uterus. Now, the egg is going to stay in the fallopian tubes for about 24 hours, and this is when and where the fertilization takes place. Now, this is really interesting. We talked about spermatogenesis in the male sperm development. Well, with females, it's a little bit different. We're going to talk about this in a little bit, but it's called oogenesis, and this is egg development. And so when a female is in utero, so inside their mother, all their eggs go through meiosis 1. And then they kind of sit in the ovaries and wait. And as they get released, they only jump through meiosis 2, which is chromosome reduction. They jump through meiosis 2 only when they're fertilized by a sperm. Otherwise, they don't actually go through meiosis 2, and they would have too many chromosomes. All right, so another thing is if implantation occurs in the fallopian tubes, like implantation of the egg, this is called an ectopic pregnancy. This can be super dangerous, and so the baby would grow inside the fallopian tubes, and it can cause some major, major problems. Now, signs and symptoms of an ectopic pregnancy are usually vaginal bleeding and pelvic pain, or one side of the body is in a lot of pain. If it's caught right away, you can take the drug Trexol, or if it's not caught right away, you would have to have surgery, and then you may actually lose a fallopian tube, which is not good at all. All right, moving on to the uterus, and you can see the picture there. You can see the fallopian tubes, you can see the ovaries. Now the uterus this is where the zygote attaches and develops. So where the zygote attaches and develops. Now, the uterus is very thick-walled. Now, this myometrium is muscle. This is the layer, like I said, that contracts during birth and menstruation. And then that leads us to our endometrium. Remember that endo means inside. So this is the inner layer of the uterus. And this builds up in preparation for implantation of a fertilized egg or zygote. This is the part that builds up, and then it can also shed during menstruation if the egg is not fertilized. And you can see all this there. All right, now, if someone has an endometrial lining that is growing where it's not supposed to grow, so maybe at the top of the fundus or even inside the fallopian tubes, this is called endometriosis. And this can be also very dangerous, and this is also going to lead to really bad menstrual cramps, a lot of heavy bleeding and things like that. So it is important that if those things are going on, that people get things checked out. From our uterus, we're going down into the cervix. And the cervix, this is the narrowing or lower part of the uterus, and it controls what goes in or out. This is also where the cervix, so you can see it right here. So if I just draw a little arrow over to the cervix, this is also where cervical cancer can happen, uncontrolled cell division. This is usually triggered by HPV, which is human papillomavirus. And this is why Gardasil, which is a vaccine that girls in grade 6 will usually get, and I think boys can too. And what this does, it prevents the 6 to 9 different types of cervical HPV viruses that cause uncontrolled growth of the cervix. All right. Now, leading down from the cervix, we have the vagina, and this is also known as the birth canal. It's lined with mucosal cells that secrete mucus. Now, this is really important. As sperm require a medium to swim through, that's why we have all that mucus in there. Now, what you'll see as well is that the vaginal environment, the pH of a vagina is 3.8 to 4.5. So not so good for sperm. And this is why, if you think back to our sperm anatomy and the pathway of sperm, it's really important that all those secretions take place so that it's going to reduce the amount of acid in the vagina. So it's going to increase the pH to about 7. Now, going down, just prepare yourself. We've got a picture here of all the external structures of the female reproductive system, and we're just going to label them. And so what we've got at the very top, we've got the clitoris. And then over from there, we've got the urethra. And that leads us to the labrum majora. And then the inner labrum, or labrum minor. And then we have the vaginal opening. And then we have the anus. Now, the labia are folds of skin surrounding and protecting the vagina. Now, they contain a lot of nerve endings and blood vessels and have a function in sexual arousal. The labrum majora is located on the outside, and the labium minor is located on the inside. That brings us next to the clitoris, which is located at the anterior or front end of the labia. It's responsible for the feelings of pleasure when stimulated. Its function is just like a male penis. It and the labia have erectile tissue. During stimulation, blood rushes to that area. Now, the last thing we have there is the urethra, and urine from the bladder exits from there. All right, so make sure you guys take a look at all that stuff, and your goal would be to memorize all those structures and functions. All right, have a good rest of the day.